Welcome back to another episode of the Made Alive podcast, where we have curious conversations about what it means to walk the way of Jesus as we live out the Made Alive life in communion with God, in community with God's people, and committed to the cause of the kingdom. My name is Haley Gregory, and I am one of your hosts for this season on hospitality, which we've been loving these conversations, and I'm so excited for today. And I'm joined by my beautiful, brilliant co-host, who we also happen to be the hat girls today, yes, which was not planned. So if you're watching this, you notice we both have hats on, but that was not coordinated. But Gloria Kim, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me here. We're very excited too. Welcome our guest speakers. Yes. Today, I'm very excited to introduce the Lin's family here. Pastor Josh is on staff here as our discipleship pastor at LifeGate, and we have his family joining today. We are very excited to hear all different generational perspective of hospitality. And yeah, Josh, why don't you kick us off by introducing yourself?
Yeah, I'm Josh. I'm the husband and father, I guess.
Great. Good title.
I am Tina, and we stepped into LifeGate about 2 years ago and been coming ever since.
Awesome.
My name's Micah. I'm a freshman.
My name's Abi, and I'm a sixth grader.
Awesome.
All right. Well, we'll just jump right into the question. All right. We would love to hear what are some of your family's experience in practicing hospitality towards people who aren't exactly like you, and what have been your experience in that? What have you learned from it?
You know, it was a value that Tina and I shared, and we've been trying to be really intentional about bringing our whole family along for the journey in terms of what it means to love the least of in our world, to be hospitable. What have we been involved with?
It's not just a hospitality. I think of it also as just we were very intentional with exposure to be up close and personal especially for our kids. Some of the things we talked about yesterday is like they might not remember the event or might not remember some details, but it was formative for them to become who they are today. When they started preschool, we were very intentional picking a program where there was 18 students and 9 seats were set aside for kids who are in the normal development track, and half the seats were set aside for students with disabilities. So for 2 years, they were in that classroom and all fully integrated. And Micah had a best friend who was blind, so the whole class learned Braille.
Wow.
And Abi had a best friend who was in a wheelchair and also communicated through a talker, through a device. And their overarching theme for that program was same but different. So Micah and his friend can both see, but Micah sees with his eyes, and his friend saw the world through his other senses. Whereas in Abi and her best friend, they were both mobile, but she got around from walking, and he got around with a wheelchair, and they communicated differently as well. So those things were very formational, even though at age 3 and 4, they're not going to remember, but that's made them who they are.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so it's been an intentional part of our family.
Wow.
Yeah. I'd love to hear Micah and Abi's point of view of like what have been most formative, seeing your parents opening up their house and being hospitable to people who are not necessarily like them. How has that shaped your faith journey?
I think it's really also formative, like the preschool. It really develops a sense of empathy at a very young age. And I think that travels throughout life and like how you live like daily. And I think at school, that's really important, especially now in like Gen Z, Gen Alpha, with like social media and everything, that you have to be kind in order to like have like a memorable message, I feel like.
Wow. Yeah. Really good.
I think that since we were able to start learning about people who are different from us when we were young, we just don't tell the difference and are just welcoming now.
That's so good.
Okay. Yeah, I think that is so beautiful and profound. I also grew up in an integrated school, and it was fairly revolutionary for like the generation. Obviously, I'm not that old, but
Thanks for that.
Yeah. You're welcome. Dig it, Josh. But I grew up in that, and I think it is really powerful because you begin to experience people in a different way. And you begin to see that what divides us so often, especially in the disability conversation, which is a whole different conversation as it relates to hospitality, because welcoming a blind person into your home actually requires different things, right? Or a deaf person, or a person who is disabled requires a different level of care. And I think that we don't often talk about that in the church. And I think it's a beautiful reminder of just the way in which we've been formed as the family of God across difference. So thank you for sharing that, y'all. I think that it's really important that we talk about families in this, right? I think so often we hear from young people in this community who are either single or married who are like really hospitable. But like there's a really beautiful part about being a family that's hospitable, and the power of that. And so I think specifically talking about how kids help that space, right? Like what does it look like for like how do you think kids or the young people in your home? And so obviously Josh and Gina, I'd love from your the parents' perspective, and then Micah and Abby from y'all's perspective as the kids in the home. How do you play a role in welcoming and serving those who are overlooked in our communities?
Like we're not born with prejudice and judgment and hatred. That's learned behavior. Yeah. And as young kids, especially very young kids, they're just natural at just being so generous with love and kindness. They just want to play and they just love others, and they don't recognize these differences as anything that's less than or and understand marginalized or anything. So just their presence as young kids is serving others in itself, is loving to others in itself. So as a family, again, because we had that vision, like all we want for them to grow up to be kind, compassionate human beings. And that's not something you could just be like, be compassionate. Like we just say it, just do it. Be kind. Like we have to set an example. Yeah. So we're very intentional, and it helps with that vision for a family to just say yes or no to certain events, certain things, certain paths in our lives in order to create that space for them to grow in compassion and empathy. Because right after their preschool, we intentionally chose an elementary school that was a newcomer welcome center so that they were exposed to international diversity. So that young age is very formative for them. So as parents, the onus is on us to, they don't plan their schedules, their play dates. We do. So as parents, it's on us at that age to set that kind of vision for the family.
Wow.
Yeah, often we would drag them around, or we would open up our homes and have people in our home, and they would just have people in our house all the time and figure out how life around that. But with that, our both of our kids were also, they became kind of a vehicle for Tina and I to find a relationship with others as well.
Totally. Yeah.
Because they would make friends on the playground, they would make friends at the school, and it would allow us to build relationships. So it was a two-way street, even though they didn't know that.
Right. It's unconscious on their part.
Right.
They're just making a friend.
Right.
And it opens up this new sphere of influence, right? Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Micah or Abby, do you have anything to add?
I remember, what was it? It was like a Valentine's Day, and we were volunteering at a nursing home. And I feel like hospitality is creating a space that's welcoming, and you not only welcome others, but you also welcome like the Holy Spirit and God's love, and you can touch other people with that. And so when we were there, we learned stories and really understood other people's backgrounds and gave deeper insight into their lives.
It's just making me recall my upbringing, that like growing up as a missionary kid in the Philippines. Like you just never know who will be in need of a place to stay or just come by for dinner. And it was just so sweet. As a kid, I was just so happy that we had just guests around the house. Like, I was like, oh my gosh, something's different today. Like
I
I
stay up later.
They always enjoyed that.
yeah. But it's definitely was formative for me because that's now how it shaped me to approach strangers even easier. Like as a kid, like I was just exposed to like my parents bringing, whether that's like friend or acquaintances, like they brought them home, but they were still strangers to me, So like I like had to go out of my comfort zone to be interacting with them, especially if they brought their own kids and like we're technically strangers, but we're trying to be friends. So that muscle was being used, like even as a kid, and then now I'm like, oh, I'm in ministry now. Like it's kind of natural for me to just approach strangers, and like I just take it for granted. It's just been so beautiful. Anyway, what are some fears and hesitation you've had in opening your house to people, to strangers in life that were in need, and how has God challenged you and changed your perspective about those?
I remember a story.
Yeah.
Mike and I were, I don't know if you remember this, but we were outside working on the yard one afternoon. It was I think it was a Sunday afternoon actually. And a random stranger came up. He was Spanish speaking and started to ask for directions to this place, Guyana. It was like chicken, hen, right? Like, and he kept asking, and he had a piece of paper with an address on it. I was like, oh yeah. You just go walk like 4 or 5 blocks down and turn left, and you'll be there. And I kept trying to communicate that I don't speak Spanish, so and then he started to insist that I take him there, which is probably culturally normal, but it was a little awkward because I was there with Micah, and so I remember bringing him back into the house and trying to explain to Tina that I'm going to take this random stranger guy and drop him off at wherever he's trying to get to. And so she's like, Tina, I remember was like, okay, well, leave Micah here. And but she said, oh, but there was a sense, yes, let's help. If you're going to do this, let's go. And then she said, well, if I don't hear from you in like 24 hours, then we might like, be safe and everything. And I don't think that safety is immediately the first thing that comes to mind. I mean, definitely there are some certain precautions. We want spaces to be welcoming, which means that they need to be safe spaces. And so we've tried to find safe spaces for our kids to also participate and come with us. But in a situation like that, I ended up taking the guy and dropping him off, and he got to where he needed to go. But some of that also was just we wanted to live that value in front of our kids. And there was a little bit of an unknown, like, is dad going to make, I don't know. None of that even crosses our minds, but even though it's awkward.
Yeah. There's like a moment of like pause, right? Where you're like, I think that this is going to be okay.
Is this going to be a good idea?
Yeah. And I think a lot of people live in that. A lot of people live in the fear of the like, I'm not going to do it because of X, Y, and Z, right? And I love that you guys don't live in that, but I think that there is a lot of people who live in that fear a lot of the time.
I mean, we were delivering groceries during the pandemic to families, and I think the neighborhood that we were delivering groceries to, like, a lot of people would hesitate, but they're still just people. They're people we knew. We knew some of their kids. They were at the same elementary school, and we got to know the families. And when you treat people with humanity, with dignity, like it's safe.
Yeah, it's like they're humans or something.
Yeah.
I thought about when you asked the question, the story. We've had people live in our home that were very different from us, but they were people in need. But even the simple thing of just even cultural little differences of like we take our shoes off in an Asian home. And so little things like that, we kind of have to live and learn with each other. But I think the lesson is that when we're close up and we're rubbing close up to people who are different than us and building that relationship, it can be comfortable, but it's totally refining. Just like in marriage, just like in parenting, when you rub up close with other people, when you allow that refining work to happen, that's where the change is.
That'll preach. Tina, are you gonna get up and preach one day? Because that feels like no, like legit. I think when we're rubbing shoulders with people in our daily lives, it's where the real like heart change begins to happen, because it's really easy to be like, yeah, you look different than me, and from a distance, whatever. But like when you actually begin to engage with those people, like that's where the fear and the hesitation begins to become less and less and less. So yeah, Micah or Abby, do you have anything to add to that?
I think for hesitations, like when you're inviting people into your home as like at a young age, and also going to volunteer, like it's not like it wasn't my money that was paying for the food or anything, but I could still see how much of a toll that took for volunteering for you two, that it's still time and energy and money, and how it's like emotionally straining and exhausting too at the end of the day, and how it has to be a choice to volunteer to help others, to be hospitable, and how that still takes a lot of effort, I think. So
that's good. Abby, do you have anything you want to add? It's okay if you don't.
I think like also with hesitation, like even when you're inviting people to play at school, you're like, we want to play with these people, but maybe not these people.
Yeah, that's real. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of people live in the, I think was he talking about that today, or was that last week, where he talked about like the fear, right? Like where we just are so crippled by it. And I think a lot of families live in that. We live in a world where we have a lot of access to a lot of news and information about a lot of things that can just be really fear-inducing, right? Like sometimes social media is a doom space, right? Like where it's like, oh, don't invite people over, like don't whatever, like who knows who you're inviting into your home. And I think that so often the gospel upends that, right? And it reminds us that
the richness of what we've experienced by opening our lives, opening up our home, being involved with other people has really outweighed any of the negatives, the fears, the downfalls, although we have learned some things along the way.
Sure, it's like a learning process, right? More than living into the fear. It's like how do we live through the fear, right? It was today's message, because you're talking about that witness, right? Or like I don't remember what he said, but it was just super. I think that's really powerful what you guys just shared. So I think oftentimes on these we like to try to be practical of like how can families with I mean you guys have been doing this for a long time, because you guys aren't that young. You're not like in well, I guess technically no, I guess you're in high or middle school now, right? Yeah. And so what's one practical step that families can take this week or in this month to start living out Christ-like hospitality toward people who are different than them or people who are marginalized?
I thought of we used to make care packages. The kids had fun making them, putting socks, soap, whatever, little care packages. And we had a bin just in our van, just ready to go anytime we're at a red light. And anyone now it's more prevalent, window washing everything at a red light, but just to open the window, pass a care package, look the person in the eye, ask their name. And when we got more comfortable with doing that, we would end with, hope you have a warm place to rest your head tonight, things like that. And that interaction is under 1 minute, but we're offering the gift of dignity and being seen in that moment. And it seems to be something that it's a simple thing that we could do as a family. there's no ramp up to do it. We could do that this week. And the care package doesn't have to be elaborate. It could be a simple, and you can get to the point, write a little note or something like that.
Yeah.
I think we've tried to be intentional in opening up our home to always have people over, whether it's new families, old families that we've known, that's just a regular rhythm in our household. And they have to deal with it. And they're phenomenal at it. We just had a young couple over to our house last week, and the kids know that they get to interact with someone new as well in our household, and then they leave space. It's just a part of regular rhythm of being invitational and hosting.
And it's like Narup said, I think that was a very powerful thing you said today. The hospitality is not about your house or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, we had people over last minute, and it's not worrying about the cleanliness, even the food. It's like, just go buy something. It's not about that. It is about sitting at the table together, creating that space. That's the focus, not the other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
I think hospitality can also be like habitual, like not even having like a big meal for Thanksgiving. And having people over, but also just the little things like every day, like holding a door open or saying hi. And what you're doing in that moment is like you're making people feel like they belong, like they're at home, and that's part of hospitality. And I think that's a really big thing that a lot of people could do.
Yeah. Tina, I love what you talked about with the care packages. I read this article a couple of years ago. I was talking about it was out of one of the homeless coalitions here, either on the Front Range somewhere. They were talking about how most of people who are on like the corners or whatever, like they may not be unhoused, but there's like a lack of dignity in it.
Yes.
And that most people don't make eye contact with them. Like they actually go for the majority of their day without a single person looking them in the eye. Because there's like this like shame almost of like, I don't have anything to give or whatever. And it's really not about giving anything to them. It's about giving them dignity. And so there was like, they were talking about how one thing you can do is just look them in the eye and say hello. Like that is in fact an act of care for that individual who's standing there. And I love that I love what you said, because I just think that it reminded me of that, of that it's just that one step of just providing dignity for somebody in 1 minute, that you have no idea the impact that could have on somebody's day or life, really, even.
And I think the biggest way to extend dignity in those situations is like asking for the name. Hey, you have a name.
Yep.
Our beloved God calls you by your name, and like you are seen in love, like in that moment. And just like a one line sharing the gospel, and like, hope you know that Jesus loves you. Yeah. I think it's beautiful. I'm curious, like when you guys are sitting around the table, when you have people over, obviously you will start noticing the differences in backgrounds, beliefs, and cultures. Like once you start noticing those differences, like what are some ways that you can draw people to just feeling more seen, than instead of like focusing on the division that is present at the table?
Yeah, that's a great question. We didn't prep you for that one, so sorry.
Any thoughts? I think one of the things that we enjoy both with our friends and when we have guests over is like being curious of people, and so asking more and more questions, wanting to pull stories out, because that becomes fun. It shows differences, definitely, but you learn that the person's story and their journey, and you get to share your own. I think that that open posture, it helps to bridge any kind of differences that there are. But at the same time, we've had our missteps about that as well. We had invited a family they were in need, and they moved in, and we didn't have certain conversations that we needed to have. And we learned from that experience and had some missteps. And yeah, but within it, just knowing that there's grace enough to cover all of us is really helpful. Any other thoughts?
No, I like that. Like, it's the curiosity and asking questions and learning other people's stories, which is great.
Micah has something.
I think over the table, once you get over the barrier, it's about finding like the connections between people and also about their differences too, like what makes them different, what makes them human too, and how that connects to your life and how that can really help shape your own story too, I think.
Yeah, I appreciate what Micah brings up, because as a family, we are a little bit unabashedly Chinese, right? Like, whether it's the food or the Chinglish in the household, or
pretty well.
But it's acknowledging that there are differences, not pretending otherwise. Like, and because, our experience is we are a non-majority family in a very different world, and so there's an awareness that there are differences in our household, and we embrace that, and that it's a good thing. It's not something that would divide, but rather, if we appreciate differences, we appreciate the differences in us, and so we can appreciate differences in others, and it actually draws us. We can like compare and contrast, and it can be moments that are actually fun rather than something that would divide us.
That is so good. That's really great. Micah and Abby, I kind of want us to end with is there an experience or a story or maybe a person who you feel like as you've engaged with them has just felt really impactful for you guys, whether that's in your faith journey or just as it relates to being able to engage with people who are different?
I think I remember in elementary school we had the newcomer welcome center, and there was it Mutiwanwa, right? Yeah. There was a boy in my grade. His name was Mutiwanwa, and I think we began to connect, I think, through school and outside of school too, because our family collectively helped theirs, and I think it just, that in itself, just being hospitable, just built the bond, I think. So
yeah. Oh, I love that. That's really awesome.
I had a friend in preschool who was in a wheelchair. I knew he was different, but I couldn't tell. We just communicated.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really powerful. I think it's important just that young voices remind us, right, of the power. I think it's really easy for us as adults to sit and talk about all the stories, but I think that there's such beauty in that. You guys are students, right, who, you just are living your lives. You're going to school and you're making friends and you're doing the small things of holding open doors and saying hello and getting to engage with people. And those are the small moments where the gospel gets to shine through into our city and into your home and out of your home. And so we just really appreciate that. We're grateful for that. Well, Lin family, do you guys have any last comments as we're closing up here?
I just think just this whole the whole hospitality. I don't talk with this normally. I think the importance and why it's so critical to spend time with people who aren't like us is that in that unknown, our imaginations can tend to go wild, and there's a tendency for it to be fear-based, and that's just a breeding ground for prejudice and bias. So, and like in this sermon series, it's hospitality. That's what's going to change it. It's not going to be, a book club or a church sermon or, a news clip that's going to change anyone's hearts. It's meaningful relationships where people are sharing stories and where empathy and love can grow, that you can see that you're same but different, and we celebrate those differences. And having people in our lives, it's not just breaking down our walls to other people. It's Josh touched on it. It works both ways. Because right now, being a Christian, there's so much, negative connotation that comes with that.
Yes.
And being a pastor's family, that's not a label I wanted to put back on again.
It's hard. Yes.
Sorry.
So sharing those stories, I hope in that we're able to break down other people's stigmas as well, and in just how we are. So
I would it just as a last comment, as parents, somewhere along the way, Tina and I, we came to an agreement, like, this is a core family value, and we're just going to bring our kids along for the ride. Because of the hope of the kinds of people that we wanted our kids to become. And so there's been such intentionality in serving, opening up the home, of going to places and volunteering and exposing our kids to this value of hospitality, without using that word. That so that it becomes a regular part of life.
Yeah, it's like DNA, right? It's just there. You're not really thinking about it,
right?
Like, I don't know about you guys, I don't think about my DNA very often, but like, it's there. You know what I mean? It's just like a part of who you are. So, well, everyone, thank you so much. You guys are one of the most, I feel like, and I just have to say this on here because it's true, one of the most quietly resolute families. Like, you guys just do it, you just live it, and you're so engaged, and this community is better because of that. And so we're very grateful for you, from Abi to Josh, for all of your commitment to loving and caring for people. So all of you, thank you so much, and thanks for being here. Thanks for engaging in this conversation. So thank you so much for tuning into the Made Alive podcast. Make sure to tune in next week as we continue our series on hospitality. We'll see you then.